decided to share with you the agenda of the first half of the day, which we're going to spend together. So we're going to start with the presentation of key highlights of M&A Radar Ukraine report, which will be presented by Peter Lattes, partner, head of advisory KPMG in Ukraine. Then a panel discussion will follow, which will be dedicated to Outlook 2020, which will be moderated by Dmitro Musatov, partner, valuations, mergers and acquisitions, financing, KPMG. After that, the final part of our formal section, that would be an insightful interview with the investor. And for that part, Alexander Lyubayev, Director of Corporate Finance and Treasury, will join us. So all the three blocks we're going to have without any break, so please stay tuned. Before we start, two announcements. First, you will all receive the electronic English version of M&A Radar report with the follow-up email after the event. And the second one, as you understand, the language of this event is English. We have simultaneous translation into Ukrainian, so if at any point you need help with the translation, you can have headsets at the left corner of the room. If anyone at this point needs that, please raise your hand, and my colleagues will help you. Does anyone need any headsets which are on the left side? No, right. Okay, so let us begin. For that, I invite Peter Lattes, partner, head of advisory KPMG Ukraine. Please, Peter.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to see so many people here again for the third year of our launch of the M&A Radar, as we're now calling it. So this year we have rebranded our publication and we've redesigned it as well. And I'll come on to what that means later on in the presentation. But for now, let's dig into what's been going on in the world of M&A. So I'm going to cover four things this morning. I'm going to give you the global context, then talk about what's been happening in the region, so Central, Eastern and Southeastern Europe, and then we'll dive into what's been driving M&A activity in Ukraine. So if we look at the global picture, overall, both deal value and volume declined in 2019. So value of deals was down by 7% to 3.3 trillion, and the number of deals was down by 4% to just under 20,000. What was the main driver of that? Well, Europe was very sluggish, so deal value was down by 22%. Primarily driven by weak economic growth in the Eurozone, and also the woes of Brexit, which for many British people like myself has been a perennial point of discussion. We won't linger on that. But what has been happening, interestingly, is that the average transaction size increased and was actually up by 10% to nearly 400 million. And on top of that, PE multiples also rose as well, to an average of 11.6 times in 2019. So it's quite a high global average. And if we look at what happened overall, so we see that the US actually increased its market share up to 47% of total deal value globally, and that's the highest level that they've seen since 2001. And China actually contracted, so their share of global M&A was down to 9%, and 12% in 2018. We also did see in late 2018 and into 2019, the Chinese government started to put some of the investment on hold that had been made in previous years into sectors which were determined not to be really for the benefit of the Chinese economy. So that's perhaps no surprise. In terms of sectors, so two sectors, industrial and chemicals and healthcare and pharma, accounted for 30% of total deal value. But the largest deal globally was actually in the aerospace and defense sector, which was a $90 billion merger of United Technologies Corporation and Raytheon. So, moving on to closer to home. So the IMF groups 22 countries into Central, Eastern and Southeastern Europe, which is more analogous to the region where we are. And what happened there was that basically deal activity followed the trend that we saw globally. So value down by 9%, volume down by 7%. But interesting that this region was more insulated from the Eurozone slowdown and Brexit concerns that we saw in wider Europe. So Western Europe was much more impacted by that. And not surprisingly, Russia and Poland are the two powerhouses of M&A in the region, accounting for nearly 3/4 of the total deal value from these 22 countries. Followed behind by Czech Republic, Turkey, Romania, Bulgaria, but in 7th place, Ukraine. And interestingly, out of these 22 countries, there's only 3 which recorded double-digit growth, Ukraine being one of those. So that's a very positive sign. Overall, we saw deal value and volume down in the region, but Ukraine is booming. So, moving on, headlines for Ukraine. What are the key things we want to take away from this morning? So, third consecutive year of double-digit growth for Ukraine, which reinforces the fact that deal-making is back. It wasn't a one-off or just a freak second event last year. Deal-making is returning to the market and heading in the right direction. We saw that inbound M&A actually exceeded the total value of domestic deal-making in 2019. And that's something that hasn't happened for a number of years, and the total value was only second to the peak of 2013. So we're really seeing confidence coming back from international investors into the Ukrainian market. Baxtel's acquisition of Vodafone Ukraine, the largest deal in Ukraine last year, but also the 25th biggest deal in the CESE region. So again, that's pretty remarkable. And although the absolute number of deals was down, real estate and agriculture still accounted for the greatest share in terms of deal number. So they are the most active sectors for M&A. And that's not surprising given that clearly Ukraine's growth story in terms of agricultural exports, and therefore the need for investment into real estate and construction to support the infrastructure that's required. But overall, there are some headwinds which Ukrainian M&A is facing, but we remain positive on the outlook for 2020. So, in terms of deal activity, as I said, 29% growth in deal value, so up to 2.35 billion in total, which is approaching back to where we were in 2014. The transparency of the market improved quite significantly. So transparency is when we look at the number of deals that had deal value disclosed versus those that didn't. And so increased by 12 percentage points to 59%. So getting closer to what we tend to see in more developed economies, which is positive. Deals on average were larger, so up by 4% to an average of 50 million. However, that is more driven by the inbound and outbound activity, and we'll come back to that. And overall, there were 5 deals valued in excess of 100 million, which is the largest number since 2013. So again, positive indication that the appetite for investors to commit serious capital to Ukraine is increasing. What happened then in terms of deal volume? Well, we saw the market clearly collapse in 2014 and 2013, but then was growing steadily year on year until 2018. Deal value stagnated last year at 80 deals. Now, part of the reason for that is that particularly amongst domestic investors, there was more concern in the build-up to the elections, and so we saw a slowdown in activity. So we're hoping that this year we'll see a rebound and return to growth. So moving on to key sectors. So the communications and media sector was by far the largest in terms of deal value, but again, primarily on the back of one transaction. Real estate and construction was second with just under 470 million worth of transactions, followed closely by power and utilities with 250 million, but that was primarily just VTech investing into Omnilevers. So those 3 sectors accounted for nearly 2/3 of total deal value. And on the flip side, in terms of volume, so real estate and construction most active, followed by agriculture, and then third was innovation and technology. which is not unsurprising, given that everyone knows that Ukraine is a hotbed for developers and programmers, and we've seen a lot of international investors taking a much closer look at opportunities here in the market. So those three sectors accounted for nearly 50% of all activity. And in terms of transparency across those sectors, it varied from 40% in power and utilities up to a high of 75% in real estate and construction. So you can see it's quite varied. In terms of cross-border, so domestic deal-making was down by 17% in deal value terms, and down by 6% in volume. However, domestic deal-making is still the largest part of the market overall. In terms of inbound, the value more than doubled to 1.15 billion. Although, as you can see, it's only about 2/3 of the number of deals compared to domestic. The number of deals itself were up by 16%. And at 1.15 billion, that's equivalent to more than twice the average run rate of inbound investment since 2013, which has been consistently around about sort of £500 million. And in terms of outbound activity, it was up by nearly 40% to 250 million, although the number of deals itself was down by 40%. And in contrast to the figure I gave on the average deal value, domestic deal makers are much more cautious. So the average transaction size there was actually down by just over 30% to 29 million. Inbound. So let's have a look at where did all this money actually come from that was invested into Ukraine. So the largest share came from CIS, or more specifically Azerbaijan, with Backcell's acquisition of Vodafone Ukraine for 734 million. The US was a distant second, about 14% of total value, so 3 deals, combined value of 166 million. Then followed by Europe, which, although the deal value was lower, they are the most active and have been for the last few years, so 18 deals in total. Although it should be noted that the average ticket size in Europe is 23 million, so actually lower than what we saw in terms of the average from domestic investors, which is interesting given that we do see continued interest from internationals, and particularly European players, coming into the market. So we hope that it won't be long before we see that average ticket size increasing. There were 3 deals from Middle East and Africa, where the average ticket size is slightly higher at 35 million, and then 1 from Asia. So overall, a reasonable spread, but given that the market is small, clearly there's a high level of concentration, particularly amongst a small number of large deals. Then moving on to top 5 deals. So top 5 is represented by 4 sectors in 2019. Communications and media, real estate and construction, power and utilities, and innovation and technology. Those deals were spread, 2 were domestic, 2 were inbound, and 1 of them was outbound. And the international investors were from Azerbaijan and the US, and 1 outbound deal to France. Those deals accounted for 61% of the total value of M&A invested. So this is one challenge for the market. M&A continues to be highly concentrated in Ukraine amongst a small number of large deals. If you compare that to the top 5 deals in Central Europe and Southeastern Europe, there's only 15% that's accounted for by the top 5, and in Poland it was 31%. So there's a real need to drive a much more sustained level of investment activity to broaden out the market in Ukraine. And when you also look at Ukrainian M&A as a percentage of GDP, it's still only 1.5%. Compare that to an average of nearly 3% for Southeast and Central Eastern Europe, and 9% in the US and the UK. So clearly, that means there's a lot of room for growth, and a reason why, like today, we're promoting Ukraine as an investment destination, because we believe there's a real opportunity for domestic and international investors to realise value. So, those deals were running from bottom to top. So, Future acquired Ocean Plaza, so it's the 5th largest deal. SnapLink acquired AI Factory, and that's their second transaction in Ukraine since 2015. DTEC, obviously acquiring PE firm Organego. SKM acquired Bureau de Cedres in France, and then Vaxel's blockbusting acquisition in further Ukraine. So, we have a panel coming up in just a minute about Outlook, but it would be remiss if KPMG didn't give you our view of what we think is going to happen in 2020 as well. There's clearly a number of headwinds that Ukraine is facing. So, one big issue which needs to be addressed is what's going to happen on reform of green energy tariffs. Clearly, we all hope that the government takes a pragmatic approach to this, because any decision that would impact the existing investors and the tariffs they receive could have wider repercussions for the investment community in general, and particularly international investors, who would have concerns about rule of law and the ability to change other laws in the future which may impact their investments in other sectors. So clearly this is a big issue. Second, it's obviously Privat Bank. Widely reported across the press, in Europe and around the world, and people are watching. Clearly the IMF wants to see resolution on this, and I believe Ukrainians do as well. So we need to see when and if the law is going to be passed and in what form, and what impact that will have. Beyond that, the pace of structural reforms is a key issue for Ukraine. I was at an event, ACC event on Tuesday evening, and the IMF was making it very clear, if Ukraine wants to get to the level of GDP that Poland has today, structural reform is an imperative. Without having strong rule of law, property rights being guaranteed through legislation and actually implementation of that law, investor confidence won't be here, and if we don't have that, we won't see the increase in GDP that we need of about 7% per annum for the next 20 years to get to where Poland is today in terms of its GDP. If we go back to 1985, Ukraine and Poland had roughly equivalent GDP. But the transformation of the Polish economy, their integration into Europe, has seen their economy rocket, while clearly Ukraine has unfortunately been lagging. So, big opportunities. Obviously, the ongoing conflict in eastern Ukraine and control of Crimea needs to be resolved. And we also had a flare-up in eastern Ukraine on Tuesday, which hopefully isn't an indication of anything further. But that obviously weighs on investors' minds as well. And then BEPS legislation. So BEPS is obviously aimed at reducing the ability to shift taxes from one jurisdiction to another. There's a question mark as to what impact this will have on M&A. Clearly, we saw towards the end of last year, when the news about implementing the law here was gathering momentum, that some Ukrainian sellers were more cautious and wanted to adopt a wait-and-see approach. Others, buyers and sellers, factored it into their valuations and their deal negotiations. I don't think there's any empirical evidence from the countries that have implemented BEPS or are more advanced in their implementation that it's had a significant impact on M&A. It's something we need to be mindful of. But what are the tailwinds? Let's talk about the positive. So, obviously Ukraine has been benefiting from stable monetary policy over the last few years, and every sign is that that will continue. The National Bank of Ukraine is also targeting inflation to get to 5%, interest rates down to 7%, and we've seen yields on Euro bonds obviously reducing. The importance of that is that clearly at the moment access to capital for most domestic companies is restricted because the cost is prohibitive to invest. So hopefully, if we see this momentum continue, cost of capital will reduce, which should open up lending from banks as the NPL ratios continue to decline, and more appetite from corporates to actually borrow. We've had sustained economic growth. The current outlook is that expectations are for 3 to 4% growth per annum in GDP over the next 3 years. So that's good. It's sound, it's solid, it's not transformational, but it's a good base. And so that keeps investors, at least gives them confidence in the overall outlook. Clearly, the IMF and EU have reaffirmed their commitment to supporting Ukraine. That hasn't obviously as yet turned into currency flow through additional loans from the IMF, but hopefully we'll see further progress on that in the coming weeks and months. International investor appetite is clearly there. We ourselves get a number of phone calls every week from new international clients who are looking to invest here. But you also see it in the press. Both COFCO and Q Terminals announced their investment into infrastructure assets in the first 2 months of this year. And that's one area where we'll see continued investment over the coming year. Clearly given the need to support Ukraine's agricultural exports. In general, the new government has adopted a very pro-business policy, which is encouraging. I think we need to see what the outcome and benefits will be from the investment nannies, which are being offered to international investors. I'm not sure nannies is necessarily the right choice of phraseology, but I think anything that can be done to give international investors more confidence that government is on their side, government is going to make sure they help them to navigate the path of investment, and also help to understand that they are really serious about making sure there is a strong rule of law, tackling corruption is only a positive, which will help. And lastly, infrastructure, public-private partnerships. As I said, I think we'll see further examples of this. There's 4 seaports which are slated for privatisation this year. Ukraine is seeing a boom in terms of aviation travel, which again will require further investment. And then privatisations. I'm sure that Taras will hopefully tell us more about this during the panel. But clearly, we all hope that 2020 will be the year that we really do see privatisations kickstart. There is a lot of opportunity there if we can get some of these assets to market. There's clearly a number of challenges to be dealt with certain of these assets as well. But again, this could be one way that we see activity increase. So overall, on balance, our view is that we will see double-digit growth in Ukrainian M&A again in 2020. My personal view is I suspect we'll see that soften slightly from the high 20s we saw last year, probably to low 20s to high teens. But overall, we remain positive on the outlook, and we think the overall activity levels will increase. So that's it for the summary on review. Now, as Vika mentioned, you will all receive a link following this to our new and transformed M&A radar. We've rebranded it this year. We've rebranded it to identify that it is different. The static PDF is gone. Printed copies will be no more. It's now going to be a fully interactive and immersive publication. So it includes all of the data going back from when we first started the database in Ukraine in 2013. You can go through and slice the data in many different ways, many different views in terms of sectors. We think it will be a much richer and immersive experience for all of you as readers. And we hope it will also stimulate more questions and comments from you. And we look forward to receiving those comments. This is part of how we're going to transform the way that we deliver M&A content to you. And it will become, in the coming period, it will become a much more frequent report that's available, so rather than just once a year. So with that, I'd like to say thank you, and now look forward to a very interesting and hopefully slightly controversial debate on the outlook. I hope that all of our panelists have the same view. That would be rather boring, and I'm sure that won't be the case. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So now we will go to the panel discussion as we agreed, and for that I would like to invite our moderator, Dmitry Musatov, partner, valuations, mergers and acquisitions, finance, and then Dmitry will invite all our 4 prominent speakers. Dmitry, the floor is yours.
Victoria. Given that I'm kind of guiding this part of the event, I have a pleasure to announce the panelists the order that I like. And so this is the I like. So let's start with Jörg von Nolken, CEO for Continental Farmers Group. Jörg, please. Then Andrій Горохов, CEO for UMG Investments. Taras Yeleyko, Deputy Head of the State Mortgage Fund Ukraine. you now probably understand my choice of the seats. So that I have Olga Magoletska, head of the office of the National Investment Council of Ukraine. Gentlemen, you've heard a lot about the M&A in 2009 in the world and in Ukraine. And you know that there are lots of things happening, like headwinds and tailwinds, which are either helping or restraining the growth in Ukraine. And I was wondering, there is always the saying about investment climate, and one of the options to increase this level of activity in the M&A market is probably to do something on a larger scale, on the scale of investment climate in Ukraine overall. I think, Olga, you could comment about it.
Thank you, Dmitry. So, good morning, everyone, and have a nice panel discussion over here, and thank you, KPMG, for inviting me to be present. So, referring to your question, I would like to say that we, as the Office of the National Investment Council, we involved in the drafting rules, and actually it's one of our main, main pillar of what we should do as the Office of the National Investment Council, and it's our KPIs for the draft rules which should be adopted on the topic of how to improve the investment climate or business climate in Ukraine. What is on the radar now is also Peter was mentioned earlier, that so-called investment planning issue became a meme already. So everybody is laughing, but honestly speaking, not everyone understands that we are talking about not only the foreign direct investments, we are talking about also the internal investments, but on a larger scale. So it's about the direct investment agreement between the government and the investors with the amount of $100 million. And of course, it's some of the, let's say, tax incentives and other incentives will be provided by the government for such projects. I hope that this will be adopted later, because now, as you know, the RADA is blocked with the black market at all, and they have to do that. Otherwise, there would be some other discussions. Also the tax incentives were offered and announced by the President of Ukraine about the privatization. The objects for privatization, which are 10 million plus, and some, let's say, tax incentives like exempt of the income tax for 5 years will be offered for such investors who are coming and buying those objects for privatization. But it's also about 10 million plus. So technically, I believe after the land market reform, some of the initiatives, announced initiatives by the President and supported by the government and Parliament will be done.
So, as now we have you taking care of the investment climate, we would also like to look at the prospects of doing the deals larger than the average 50 million that were announced. And as far as I understand, out of our discussion with Taras, there is an expectation that it's not only the private sector who's going to supply the deals in the market, but privatization is also aiming to do so. What are the moves in this respect from your understanding, Taras?
Good morning, thank you. The rules will be very equal for everybody, what I can tell. So, thank you for the opportunity to present, here our privatization efforts. What I would like to tell, right now, I think that for the first time in 15 years, we have opportunity window for really to launch privatization process. And it's not only the window like statement, the politically, okay, the new team in State Property Fund came and we are working, we are developing the new procedures, but it's also political window because at the end of the last year, the Parliament adopted the law and cancelled this list of prohibited for privatization companies. Right now, all companies, besides of maybe the new list will appear, but it will can consist of maximum 200 companies. Lots of companies are available for privatization. The second point, very often people used to think that all state property is managed by state property fund. Frankly speaking, according to Ukrainian legislation, the state property is managed by state property fund only during privatization process. And in Ukraine, we have more than 70 central government bodies that are managing state property, and they are transferring the assets to state property fund only for privatization. So during the last 2 months of 2019, more than 500 companies were transferred to state property fund for privatization. For comparison, during previous 10 years, only 97 companies were transferred for privatization. So currently we have this opportunity. From our side, we are really working on new privatization approach. For small privatization, and we have the division, the split for the companies for small privatization and big privatization. The difference is, according to Ukrainian law, the company with balanced volume value, according to Ukrainian standard, below $10 million is small privatization, above $10 million is big privatization. And the approach for privatization is a little bit different, because for big privatization we hire the advisors that are which help us to prepare the company for privatization, and currently we are working with 5 companies. We already approved the advisors, and for each company, the advisors already, for some companies, the advisors already completed a few stages of preparation. So it's also for the first time in the last 10 years. And we are looking for the first case of big privatization late spring, early summer. If you are talking about company of big privatization, currently we have advisors for Oheke Heights, titanium quarries, for OPP, Odessa Port Plant, for Elektrovazhmash, for Krasnolimanska mine, and President Hotel. Simultaneously, we started the process of choosing the advisors for Central Energo, and we are looking that the privatization process will take place very soon, and we will move it to the market at the end of 2020. Also, for a few other companies, we decided to choose also advisors right now, and we believe that this year will become the year of big privatization. Also, if you take a look at the small privatization approach, so for this year we have the task to sell at least 300 companies. It's a big number, so in average we have to sell 1 company in 1 day, in average. And in order to do it, right now we are changing totally the structure of state property fund in order to provide, in order to move this company to the market according to the best law practices, with virtual data room, with teasers, with marketing materials, with appropriate listing period, in order to give access for everybody to get all information about the companies from any point of point of the world. And our task is to provide simultaneous, very equal, and very transparent access for everybody to our assets. So the first companies with such informational disclosure was moved to the market already, and we are marketing right now, for example, Ukraine, Kyiv bus service operator, Kyiv bus service that operates 8 bus stations in Kyiv and 16 bus stations in Kyiv region. And for the next month, we have the task to move to the market at least 15 companies for small privatization. The peak of small privatization and steady pipeline we will show on our internet site. We will give to the market in the middle of the summer. Right now we launched a new internet site with all description, all list of our assets. We disclosed it also, it's strange, but we disclosed the list of the assets that can be privatized for the first time, I don't know, in 15 years, in one place. And we are moving, also the new internet site was launched, and the virtual data room was launched in testing, for testing right now. So we are looking for investors, we are welcoming all investors, we are open always. And we really appreciate your feedbacks on maybe some concern with privatization, maybe some concern with the processes, because our objectives are really, high for this year, and our tasks and KPIs are really high, and we are really going to meet with them this year. Thanks.
So now we have some observations from the state's point of view, from the point of view of those who are actually dealing with the improvements in the environment. So we probably need to move to the sector which is responsible for the investments into the markets. And we have now two gentlemen representing both inbound investments with the foreign equity and then the local, well-known investors in Ukraine. And do you think there is something that resonates out of what we hear today and what we expect from the markets? I think we could start and talk about UMG experience in this respect. Andrei, would you share your thoughts about it?
First of all, I really appreciated KPMG report and that digital forum and all new things which are coming. We understand that you're part of digital transformation and economy. That's good, paperless stuff. And you know what? We didn't know. I didn't know what would be coming there. Certainly, because it's a surprise. Thank you, Peter. But you know what, we go along, because I also prepared some presentations and some films to show and entertain you and provide some guidance and substance towards what's happening in Ukraine in terms of deals, and just some general macroeconomic and microeconomic stuff happening with specific companies which are working at the market now. One of the slides I really enjoyed that in your presentation, that was the slide with words head and tail, right? Like flipping a coin. So we know that life has two sides. And I would like to start with a positive one, with that green colored, right? I'll try to master this.
Please double click.
Right, double click. That would be a short film, 3.5 minutes in Ukraine, and about pipeline of projects which have been successfully, and I'm sure Salih would reconfirm that, performed in Ukraine and which are in process right now. So the first would be short film. Double click. Right.
And once again.
Once again.
Should start with the click.
Perfect.
Do we have a sound here?
Supposed to be.
Meet Ukraine, the place of unbridled opportunity. In the last 5 years, Ukraine has advanced further than anyone could have imagined. Thanks to a combination of comprehensive reform and democratic governance, Ukraine has climbed 28 spots in the World Bank Doing Business ranking since 2014. In 2019, we reined in inflation, while the Ukrainian hryvnia became the world's best performing currency. Ukraine is building trust with international and domestic investors. The scale and variety of recently implemented projects speak for themselves. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been invested in agriculture, infrastructure, green and conventional energy, IT and telecom, pharma and other sectors. Our economy is now growing at 3.5%. And this is just the beginning. Ukraine has a lot more to offer. Projects planned for the near future are just the tip of the iceberg. Ukraine is open and ready to welcome new investors from all over the world to become the most desirable and attractive investment destination. We are already part of this success story. What about you?
So we used that film in Davos when we were pitching investors there, and that's positive, as far as I understand. You just said invest in Ukraine. That's one of the best destination ever. And when we were pitching in Davos, there was one deal missing because it was almost done, but it had to be completely done in order to be released. And I would like to talk in short about that deal. Shall I double click, right?
Just one click.
Just one click, okay. That's a deal freshly baked. Release was last week about acquisition of container terminal of TIS by DP World. That's as co-investment, as far as I understand. That deal is considered, at least by me personally, is excellent deal for Ukraine, because gentlemen, local investors, which have been developing this business for years, and actually it's the second generation of local investors, managed to attract last year, actually several years ago, that completed the project, greenfield project, last year. I'm talking about Cargill, which was mentioned in the film. Successfully, great terminal, great capacity, great achievement, hundreds of millions invested in Ukraine, long term. And then this year, DP World coming to market along with them, acquiring significant share in it, and that brings Ukraine and our infrastructure closer to global logistic ways, which would be used by DP World, inserting that asset and its capacity into global logistic network of DP World, which will bring more cargo to Ukraine, which would certainly, our state would get more taxes, and we'll see what other opportunities would come for other businesses supplying that infrastructure. So when that freshly baked deal was released, there were some comments on it. They are in Russian, I believe, but if you don't mind, I'll just stand for a sec and try to translate them in English. So the first one, they say that's an example for Ukrainian business and government. If there is need to create, good luck. Yeah, very positive. And then congratulations, well, that's one of shareholders, Andrei Stavnitsa. That's very positive sign for investment potential of Ukraine. And then Vladislav Vashkavan, that's IMF official, he said that very cool deal and very cool team. Our Ministry of Infrastructure writes, well, that's a great news and cool example for investors. And he's mentioning guys from Qatar with their concession won't be alone in Ukraine. That's good, developing. And we see that the guys, how they react in social media, very positive. But then we have another case, which I also want to mention, which is also positive, but there are things which I call as a homework for us to do. And all working in Ukraine meet those things on daily basis or from time to time, but that's a part of our reality. I believe other countries also do experience some challenges and in helping their businesses to flourish, but at the same time having control over what's happening in them, over ecological, labor and other issues which concern government there. For me, that's a question as follows. We've got to find somehow a balance between control and proper governance and management and development of our businesses. And we're talking about different stages. So I'm gonna talk about a company which is developing rapidly, Ukrainian producer of cars, specific cars. That's a niche market, named Shop. Who has heard about Shop, by the way, guys? Okay, perfect. So we have people in audience knowing it, but I'll show like 30 seconds, actually, sorry, about Shop. That's right, so it's pretty short, thank you. And that's...
Andrei, one question. It looks like the company is destined to cover all types of terrain. Did they succeed to cover terrain of Ukraine?
Yeah, they succeeded actually cover, to cover many places worldwide, and foreigners actually are shocked with the product which has been developed in Ukraine. And the guys are developing their product line. The guys are profitable, it's not a startup anymore. And they are also looking for growth equity, and they would successfully get it, because with such product, having a profitable company, having a strong team, it's not that difficult to attract growth equity for further development. But what's happening? I yesterday talked to a CEO, and he just returned from a trip where he was promoting products and signing contracts. And the guy, instead of sleeping and getting into good physical condition, had to prepare with his team for a nice agenda, which he will have for next several months. And that's actually what he published on Facebook. I got his approval also for mentioning that. So what he says, CEO, that's his plan for work for first 6 months of 2020. In February, he would have labor inspection would be checking this, I would say, small to medium-sized Ukrainian company developing sales and production facilities in Ukraine. So what he says, significant part of February would be dedicated to that labor inspection instead of doing other things. And what he said, that competition at global market can't wait. I mean, other guys are looking at what they do, and they want to copy. And first mover advantage is significant part of their success story. But February, labor inspection. March, April, tax inspection. May, again, labor exposure. So his question, guys, what other
need to invest?
Yeah, and that's a question. And let's see how people react on that. One guy, Ukrainian guy says, well, that's normal. You've got to be patient. Another person says, well, yeah, that's a question mark whether it's a good plan for business development. And one more guy says, well, in Spain, sometimes you have 16 inspections within 8 months. But for me, it's a question. We're not in Spain. We're Ukraine, and there is competition.
Sounds like a controversy.
Right, and when we look at Spain, for example, which was mentioned there, GDP per capita there is, well, I would say 10 times higher than here, and we're talking about developed market. We're emerging market. And in order to attract capital here, we've got to be better than others, emerging or developed economies. Otherwise, why people come here? And when I talked to that CEO of Shell, and we exchanged ideas because in our portfolio there are also a lot of assets, and all of them are in Ukraine, and we faced similar things on a daily basis. He said to me, look, I'm promoting Ukraine by doing with my team, he considers a good job, and I also agree with him. But with such conditions and with such agenda, it's a question why we have to continue having our production base in Ukraine, and why not to make a deal in other country which actually would eagerly take our production base and our team and make sure that we pay taxes, we follow the laws, but would facilitate our development and possibly decrease the number of challenges and difficulties which we face as a young company.
So you say it's not all rosy and promising? There are also obstacles.
Yeah, and if we look at that chart, we also prepared one chart that's from Financial Times, I believe. It's about foreign direct investment. What we see there is that we have China, and it's more or less around 200 billion annually for a number of years for foreign direct investment. We have US, which could be in better shape, but still above 200 billion. And we have European Union. Yeah, and it's 2018. In 2019, situation hasn't changed for the better. I'm not sure about forecast for 2020, but with Britain and other things happening in Europe, it's a question mark whether that graph would change. We always say that geographically we are in Europe, right? And we are part of Europe, and we are going there. So we are going to face that yellow chart, which is falling, of FDI. That means that there won't be a lot of capital to get unless we provide something exclusive. So being good and doing good things is certainly nice, and it's positive, and we have to do our best to go further in order to enhance investment attractiveness of our country. And whatever is being done by state is certainly welcomed, with both hands. But we still lack a strategy and a vision. And in that of Ukraine in general, and in terms of getting FDI to Ukraine, and the part which would be of that strategy has to be about competitive strategy. And I believe that's a vital part, because value proposition, which is being provided by Ukraine, is not good enough at the moment. It's good because such guys as, for example, as Salik is coming to the market, and I will give the floor in a sec. Thank you very much for your patience, by the way, with all these films and graphs. But it's like this. We are talking about high teens, or like whatever, around 20% growth in FDI investment, but we're still talking about 2 billion. And Peter accurately mentioned about ratio to GDP. It's very low. If you want to develop at 5, 6, 7, 10%, it has to be significantly more investment. We are talking about at least 10 billion, so at least 5 times more. How we are going to get it? Look at the chart, that yellow chart. We've got to be very competitive. And we've got to do more than we are doing now. So I hope one day, soon, we'll see a strategy. How a strategy, a fully developed strategy with details, how we are going to win that competition for the capital, and part with competitive strategy. I really want to see it. Because at the moment, what I see some slides with some, let's say, wishes, some statements, but I don't see instruments, I don't see deadlines, I don't see responsible people for that, and some coordination between different state parts in order to achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you. There is definitely a need for a change, as far as I could hear you. And what made you invest actually, and what made it attractive to actually invest? And that's the question which I wanted to ask both of you. But if you would let me start with Georg, it is interesting to hear what Salik would have to say about how Ukraine is attractive, or is it coming to the end, and is it actually starting? What's so attractive about Ukraine for you?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Good morning to everybody here. We just didn't make it into the 2019 statistics because the deal on the Maria assets was closed in November 2018, and I believe we were amongst the top 3 FDIs in 2018 into Ukraine. Let me give you a bit of background onto Salik, because I think that is part of the explanation. Salik is globally investing into three pillars. One is primary agriculture, as we do it here in Ukraine, and as there's also investments in Australia, for example, under Salik's umbrella. Salik invests into meat, into protein on a global scale, and invests into logistics linked to agriculture. So that's the 3 pillars of investment. Salik as an investor has been active in Ukraine since 2013, so we are not completely new to the market. We've been operating on a much smaller scale, which was since 2013 till 2018 on 45,000 hectares in Oblast Lviv. So it was a very conscious and long-time prepared decision to do the next step into Ukraine. And that is what happened in 2018 when the opportunity was the right one by acquiring the Maria assets. I don't think I've got to repeat the story of Maria because a lot of people in this room will probably know much better than I do. But it was a very conscious decision to move into a market, to do another step in the market that Salik understands. So there's a clear understanding from an investor that looks very long-term at the investments, that there are ups and downs, and looking at the economic development, at the events in politics since 2013 till 2019, you can clearly imagine that Salik has experienced a lot of the ups and downs of Ukraine over these years already. But 2019, what a year. From our perspective, and I mean that honestly, there was clearly internal factors that were quite important. First, we had an integration process of 2 companies that were on completely different modus operandi, different software platforms, different org structures. So we've run the full integration process during that year. We've quadrupled the size of the operation. We've also, not only the KPMG report, but also we have rebranded under Continental Farms Group, one brand that brings together the layout from one company and the name from the other company to show that we've taken the best of both and brought it together. So that in itself has been probably a task for a year. Apart from that, when we entered, when we did the next step in 2018 in Ukraine, with the acquisition of Maria, one big discussion was, as you can all imagine, the question of the land reform. Salik is an operational investor. There's no interest in speculation on land. There's no interest in acquiring land to keep it for a short period of time and then sell it on. 5 months after the acquisition, we find ourselves in a completely different situation. The government changes, the parliament changes, the president changes, and suddenly the land reform that we prospectively saw 5 to 10 years away is right in front of our face. And right in front of our face means it has since then moved left, right, and center. We still haven't got full clarity yet, but it looks right now that we, as an operational investor into Ukraine, with amongst the top 3 foreign FDIs in 2018, will be excluded from this market. So, talking about the headwinds, you can imagine Salik as a global investor, and I have become, for the 2 years that I'm now in Ukraine, I've become a fan of this country. But you can imagine that we as a team, as the Ukrainian team, are being also asked a lot of questions when we go to board meetings. And one of them is not the question why an investor like Salik should be excluded from the land. The question is, what are the equality of instruments that we've got a competitive disadvantage coming towards us. So that's one big thing that happened in 2019. The other thing, and that is completely out of control, but it's also a very important factor. We suddenly found a change of exchange rate, and we've joked before this panel about it. Yeah, we are an export focused industry, so you can imagine what the exchange rate has done to our company and the P&L. And apart from that, we've had, and that is completely external, and we are aware of this happening, we've had a crash of commodity prices at the end of the year. So it's been a year where we have defined ourselves as a year that probably has 4 or 5 big events together that each of them in itself would have been sufficient for a year. So what a year, as I said. But, and that's the other side of it. Let's talk about about the positives. Why did we walk into Ukraine? If you're an international global investor into primary ag, and let's focus on the primary ag side for a moment, you do look at competitive advantages of producing commodities globally. And the Black Sea region, and clearly Ukraine, has got a huge competitive advantage if you want to grow commodities that are going into export and that go into the classic export markets for commodities, for barley, for wheat, for maize, for soya, for oilseed grain crops that we produce. There's other regions of the world that have got, for certain crops, a safe competitive advantage. Western Australia, funnily enough, with a completely different political environment, with a completely different agronomical, technological approach, is also one that is highly competitive. And Salik is invested there with another 200,000 hectares. So we have clearly focused on the competitive advantage of producing commodities in the regions that we are in. And Ukraine leads, amongst others, this list globally. So that's definitely a huge, huge plus. We clearly understand the ups, the downs over the years that have occurred in this country, but we also see that the trend, although it's unfortunately not moving at the speed that any investor would wish, but the trend is moving upwards. So that's, for a long-term investor, another signal to invest into the market. If we look at the strategy of Salik, if you think very, very long-term, it's entirely logical to focus on these low-cost production areas and probably in your own risk assessment move the short or mid-term factors a bit backwards in your valuation. And that is what Salik has done when investing into Ukraine. We were clearly aware that for the short term, for the mid-term, there will still be issues that will create complications. And it's starting from the legal system, which is getting better, clearly, but has got still its flaws. It's connected to infrastructure. My favorite example is if the Ukrainian railroads would manage to halve the return speed of wagons coming back to our elevators, we would save $7.8 million per year, which is massive. So there are clear factors that short and mid-term will still affect us. But Salik has invested into Ukraine with a clear understanding that mid-term, long-term, there's a clear expectation that Ukraine will come right. And personally, I do believe in that. What we are facing now is, I've touched on the land reform, is clearly a situation where plans that we've had for further rapid expansion on the land bank, we are holding back at the moment. It does not mean we stop them. We will still look at bolt-on acquisitions, but we will not go into big-scale expansion right now. But what we clearly understand is that as a business, we now need to start leveraging the land bank and the assets that we've got. What does that mean for us? It does mean starting to integrate upstream and downstream. We need to get out of the dependency of, even with our size, we are number 6, I believe, in the Ukrainian market. We don't have any impact on the prices, so we need to start integrating upstreams, downstreams, and that will be the focus of our investment in the future. I've touched on the other pillars of investment in Salik, the meat arm, the logistics arm, and we are especially on the logistics side actively looking at opportunities. It does not mean that we want to conclude deals right now. We are waiting for the right chance. Salik has shown that it is ready to sit on an asset for 5 or 6 years in Ukraine and wait till the right opportunity comes along and do the next step. But eventually we will, and it might be soon, it might be later, it's opportunity driven, but we are focused on this now. So what I want to say with this, there are clear factors that count for a country like Ukraine, for Ukraine as such. The location, the weather, the amazing soils, the proximity to the export markets where our customers are, but there are also pitfalls and difficulties which require an investor who thinks A, long term, B, walks very, very open-eyed into this market. I would not recommend for an investor who hasn't got any operating experience in Ukraine to walk with the scale of the acquisition and probably the difficulty of that specific M&A project like Maria into this market. But when you're in here, when you understand the market, it is clearly an opportunity. And despite the fact, I've been asked whether we have been a charity in 2019, and a charity in this context I would define as, did we make a profit or did we make a loss? So my answer to this is we were close to being a charity, but we are not. So that's a huge positive. We believe in the asset that we've bought, we believe in the team that we've got, and we believe in the structure that we've established over this year to be able to manage that asset that we've got and expand it and integrate upstreams and downstreams in the future. So 2019 is clearly mixed feelings, a lot of analysis, a lot of questions, but also clear vision where we want to go.
Thank you, Georg. Before we move on with the next part of our discussion, and I want you to be brief in attending my questions, just because we kind of announced our positions, declared what is our directional view, where we are standing. I would like to make some observations, and I wanted to mention 3 things. Out of our discussion today, it looks like, first, Ukraine looks promising as a country, but this promise comes mainly from its geographical position, its climate, its people, its environment, its position between other countries, but this thing is probably not supported by the legislation, by the rules, by the government, and investors succeed despite of these obstacles and not rather due to this environment. That's one thing. The second thing is that we still have a number of directions where to invest through the history of presenting this M&A review annually. We spotted a number of ideas of investors either going directly to IT components or then to agriculture. Then we have this telecom story and so on and so forth. Looks like Ukraine is so diverse. There is no one specific clear strategy what is actually the priority for the country. It might not be the case that there should be a priority, but still. And the third point is that it looks like those who invest into the country, especially the foreign investors, should be aware that it's the long term where they focus, and the longer the target, the less predictable the achievability of this target becomes. So before you invest into Ukraine, you should make a leap of faith, believing that it's going to return at some point in time in the future. My question here comes from the different angle. Given that we have the expectations, we have the views of the market, what would be the next big thing, or what would be the next big sector attracting investors, the next shape of the investor which would enter the market? What's going to be the next? The next in 2020 and ongoing. Let's start from the state, probably. You have a number of businesses within the you have a number of businesses within your portfolio as a state property fund. You have a number of ideas in terms of development of the sectors, but what will be next?
So thank you, Dmitry, and also I would like to refer to one question in this case about the infrastructure. It's like the most underdeveloped area in Ukraine, and it should be heavily invested, and the necessary framework has been voted and adopted last year at the end of 2019. So now we have the law of concessions. And with them, we can have lots of other projects, also in port infrastructure, as well, and airports, railroads as well. Some of the railway terminals that would be done for concessions could be prepared. And there are a lot of discussions from the Ministry of Infrastructure that some of the objects we are already in preparation, and this sector will be moving. And definitely, this is, let's say, if we are trying to count all the figures for FDI, this is definitely very important because it influences our GDP growth directly. To be honest, it's one of the major factors for that. So here, with such, let's say, such projects, infrastructure projects, which they count a lot of numbers. We are talking about millions.
So should they materialize it would start immediately just above the average level of 50 million, right, probably 100 or something.
Definitely, yes, because the concession projects they are quite heavy. And if we talk about the also road infrastructure, in which state also gives and provides millions from those money from Naftogaz, for instance, let's say, so you can do a lot.
Perfect. So it's not a lottery, but still we have one bet, infrastructure. Let's see the next year. What about your opinion, Taras? What will be the next big thing in terms of the sector, for example?
Frankly speaking, for this year, we will have a huge diversity of assets, and maybe I will emphasize on the main sectors. The first sector is machinery production. We will have a few companies, really great companies for privatization this year, like Electrovash, like Dnipropetrovsky Elektrovоз budowny заводы. I don't know how to translate it. Locomotive construction company. It's the only producer of locomotives, electric locomotives in Ukraine. We will have a list of very interesting companies in machine building. Also, we will have the list of companies in energy. Simultaneously, we have a huge amount of different type of state-owned enterprises in different segments that can be interesting not only for big investors, but for middle and small-sized investors, like a very nice pieces of real estate, like hospitality. For example, this year, this spring, we will provide to the market Dnipro Hotel, and the auction will be launched late spring, early summer. Also, we have a huge number of real estate, but very often it's not operating business. It's like brownfields. And the opportunity to take these brownfields with all communications, with railway connection and all this stuff is huge right now. So And what is the main that investment opportunities are all over Ukraine and in different sectors. So we are going to provide all information, as I mentioned, and not only infrastructure, but also lots of other directions. Also, I would like to mention about our agricultural companies. Right now, we've got a huge land bank under our management, and we are looking for amendments of the land code that will allow us to privatize these companies, because currently when we are privatizing the agricultural companies, unfortunately, we are not privatizing the land, we are privatizing only the premises. And I believe that in the nearest months the land code will be amended and it will allow us to privatize also the land companies with the land. So there will be a lot of opportunities in Ukraine.
There are, it looks like you have an opportunity in our M&A report to have a separate line saying that, okay, this value of deals, this number of deals is dedicated specifically to the state portfolio of Ukraine. What would be your idea about how many years would it take the state property farm to really materialize all those ideas? Would it take you 2 years, 7 years?
I don't think that it will take 7 years. Currently, for this year, we have the task to privatize, to move to privatization at least 300 companies. And as we estimated, the state currently has roughly 1,000 companies for privatization. So it's like 2-3 years.
It's a very big portfolio coming into our M&A report. And I hope to see you next year presenting this specific case.
I hope that we will raise the M&A volume in Ukraine.
Perfect. And there was one reaction from you, Georg, with regard to privatizing the land. What would be your views in this regard, and what would be your next bet? I understand that agriculture is the sector which we also like, or love. What would be other option?
I mean, yeah, the land made me smile because I think I've expressed the questions that are being raised from our shareholders quite clearly. That your graphics have shown 2018, 2019, a trend upwards on FDI. Savic has invested 2018 into Ukraine, where it was just starting to pick up again. And I can really tell you it's not a pleasure being asked what happened to the land reform and why are we excluded. It's a question that is being asked a lot. And it has hurt trust of the investor who has put $250 million into this country in 2018 as a government long-term investment. So that was made me smile, because the privatization of the land bank is the state land bank. This is all important signals. What a clear feeling is that, and the message that I would like to ask is, don't forget about the existing investors. Don't punch the people in the face who invested when it was not sexy yet to be in Ukraine. So that's one thing, and it's probably a bit controversial, but I would like to place that message. On the positive side, it's quite clear that if we look at the agricultural sector, Ukraine is massively improving. I've been the first time in Ukraine 12 years ago. If I look not just at the level of technology that we apply as a company now, if I look at the level down to local farmers, and I use them a lot as an example to colleagues in our companies, saying this is the competition. They are owner operator and they do it incredibly well. Agriculture in Ukraine has picked up, and the trend for Ukraine to be a major player on the export market is quite clearly visible. It will continue, and the volumes that Ukraine will bring onto the international market raise. My colleagues from Australia asked me how it can happen that Ukrainian wheat, for the first time for a few years, or for quite a few years, now for the second year in a row, starts on the Asian markets to compete against the traditional export markets of Australia. So it starts to be competitive to ship Ukrainian wheat into Asia compared to loading wheat in the Perth port and shipping it on a very short distance into Asia. That's a very good signal. That's a very important signal. I cannot repeat often enough that these volumes need to be quickly, efficiently, and in a cost-efficient way put on boats. We produce about 1 million tons of product that go into export. We farm 200,000 hectares out of 40 million. So if you extrapolate the numbers, it's massive. It's massive, and 100 kilograms, 200 kilograms of yield increase per year make massive numbers all over the country. So the infrastructure will become the bottleneck, and investment needs to go into infrastructure. This is roads. If I look at it, it's a favorite of mine, so I've got to quote it. That if I look at repair costs on our own trucks that we run against repair costs that transport companies somewhere in Western Europe have, we've got 3 times per kilometer the repair costs on trucks than Western European transport company has. I've described the $7.8 million US that we would save if the return rate on wagons would halve. Extrapolate it again, 200,000 hectares against 40 million across all agricultural companies in Ukraine, multiplied by a tax rate. You understand how much money gets lost there to the state as lost tax income. So the focus on that I clearly see is that Ukraine is not only in agriculture but in other areas as well, even in IT, a big exporter, but it needs the supporting structures around it. And any privatization attempts and attraction of any investment, be it Ukrainian, be it FDI, into these sectors, deregulation of monopols are highly welcomed and necessary.
Thank you, Georg. And we were talking about the signals that you could observe in the market. What type of signals did you observe, Andrei? What's your bet in terms of the next sector? Now we have infrastructure linked to agriculture, now we have a variety of sectors coming from the state, and hopefully getting us into not only double-digit but triple-digit growth in M&A here. What's your bet in terms of the sector and the segments?
Well, a key signal, which actually I see at the market at the moment, is that state starts to hear business and really tries its best to help, assist, and promote Ukraine as a place where people stay, enjoy life, and invest, and attract foreign capital also in order to flourish and develop at much higher pace. That is why I agree actually with all the 3 speakers and what they have mentioned before, because we as Ukraine one ecosystem, and without efficient infrastructure it's impossible to compete worldwide. It's just impossible. And the example which Georg has made in terms of wheat and Asia is possible because somebody many years ago invested in deepening our birth and depths near birth, which allowed big ships to come and pick up that cargo and transport it to Asia. Otherwise, there won't be any competition with Australians. When we successfully managed to accomplish our task with Ukrzaliznytsia and its reform, I'm sure Georg would enjoy those 7 millions which he has mentioned before, and the state would enjoy additional taxes from Georg's company. In terms of privatization, I believe around 6 years ago there was very well known in this part of the world Georgian reformer Kakha Bendukidze. So when he came to Ukraine after the Revolution of Dignity and he saw what we are doing with our state property, he said, sell it. But the guys told him, well, we'll sell it cheap and efficiently, even for many reasons. But he has said, sell it. Because at the moment, what you are proving with all statistics that unfortunately the state is not an efficient manager of those companies. There is no proof otherwise. And investment guys are very pragmatic. We are about numbers and rules. We are not about words. So I'm really happy that privatization goes on. I'm really happy that state does its best to quicken it. I understand that there are a lot of challenges. For example, looking at various objects, you could see, well, 1 of 5 objects, let's say, with titanium, that there are issues not only in technology there and quality of equipment, but also there is a question mark with deposits. And previous people who managed those assets and overlooked some things that, for example, if you process something, you need deposit for that. Otherwise, what you're going to process in the years to come. When, for example, we are mentioning Centrenergo in the future, we also, I think, will face an issue because what we are saying, our energy is supposed to be green, right? And by 2050, the state says 70% of energy is supposed to come from green sources. And now you are selling old technology which is based on coal, right? And that's a challenge. But getting back to Kakabendukidze, if there is no proof that state is an efficient manager, sell it at any price. Because all those assets would stay in Ukraine. And although they have changed, will change their hands, taxes, control would still remain with the state. It's not possible to take those assets out. It's not debt instruments, which are pretty well known these days as a success story of current government selling such huge for Ukraine amounts of debt to foreigners and local players. That is why, personally, as I said, I do agree with representatives of state that infrastructure is critical, and I bet on it. I'm sure they would succeed in selling it, and new owners would come and manage it successfully, and a significant part of those owners would be foreigners, as we see from track record, recent track record, Deep World, Cargill, guys from Qatar. There would be much more money coming on board, and here we see only strategic investors. Soon, after strategic comes pension funds, investors would come, private equity would come, like Macquarie, which invests worldwide, including Australia, in infrastructure. In terms of IT, I do agree. Here, guys, what they say publicly to the state, don't help us. Just don't interfere. Look at the pace at which we developed, 20–30% a year. It's amazing how, like, number of competent people getting into IT, Ukrainians, earning good money, producing good services or good products, which easily become global. I love IT. I believe that industry will develop further. All forecasts prove it. In terms of agriculture, there is no way how we fail with agriculture, because having everything which Georg has mentioned in terms of natural resources and geography, well, we would be very stupid to fail in that part of the things. In terms of nation building and other things, here comes R&D and innovation, because we have two options. Once I have in my portfolio mission building assets, that's why I have some competence in that. Either we would be a subcontractor for heavy metal parts, but low margins, just consuming our natural resources. And that is better than just selling straightforward steel to foreign markets. Just better to produce something, add value, and sell here, because we create more value, more taxes, more labor, more labor here. But another thing, if you want to sell at high prices, if you want to develop machine building, we have to do something with innovation, with R&D, and make sure that more R&D centers come here. I assume a significant part would be international R&D, and we have some examples in Ukraine at the moment. So if, for example, we manage to get R&D innovation attached to machine building, yeah, I do believe it's possible for that industry also to flourish.
So you're doing multiple bets, healthcare, agriculture, IT?
Well, we have like 3 portfolios, various structure of asset there, and we want to invest more in Ukraine. We believe in Ukraine. But as I always say, feedback is a nice thing. It's not critics, it's a feedback. Because when you give feedback, you care about country, about ecosystem, and you want to speed up the pace. Because for us, it would be much easier to attract capital, develop, and sell to foreigners. Because when Georg was mentioning, for example, logistics, they're waiting. They want to see how infrastructure develops, what other investors come, what macro things would show. And also, you had advice for foreign investors not having operational experience in Ukraine. But for that also you could co-invest with a local investor, which do have such experience. And then some of the risks are being mitigated. So there are ways how to work in Ukraine, how to earn money here, and how to prosper. It's just we all have to do our homework. Business, their homework in terms of managing efficiently companies, creating excellent teams which develop business further, and state its own homework. And, we see that we're going there. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrei. Taras, do you have some specific reaction or answer to it?
Yeah, I was a comment, and I totally agree that for the state it's very difficult to manage all this amount of assets. Because very often there are such type of assets like, I don't know, like some small buildings, some very, very small enterprises, and it's really difficult to manage. So for the state it's very important to transfer all these assets to more efficient management. And to get the taxes, to get the new workplaces. It's about that. Privatization is not about simply sell the assets. Privatization is about transferring the asset to more efficient owner, and from the state point of view, the state should assure the transparent process, the equal access for everybody during this process. Only in this way we will be able to find this efficient owner. Because otherwise we will see the results that we've saw already in Ukraine about some type of privatization, about some assets.
Interesting. Okay.
Few comments also for the privatization. So if we are talking about that, yeah, states should do its own homework, and I need to say that everybody heard KPMG 6 years ago, and at that time even the process of making the let's say companies which are owned by the country to do a triage, and triage means that you have like 3,500 state-owned enterprises, roughly 1,200 should be liquidated, from what I remember, and some of them should be privatized, and some of those companies, they have to stay as strategic objects with the state. So actually these strategic, I don't really remember the figure, it's like 30 or 50, okay, 700. Let's say so, 700 out of that amount, and all the others, what you have either the small privatization, which will be done through Prozoro, from what I understand, and several big objects, which are some of them they have some flavor of the state, and some of them are clean and ready to sell and ready to have the FDI. So actually, the state is doing its work. It's not that fast, let's say, as you want to see or you want to hear. And for some previous years, even we heard KPMG and we are doing our job, but some of the, let's say, laws, they were adopted only at the end of last year. So for 5 years almost, we had no political power to do that. That's my comment. And also, it's also about the concession law, which EBRD was talking about it like 20 years ago, 12 years ago, when I first heard about it in September 2007. that it would be great to have the concessions law, a real one which is working in Ukraine. But now what we see, it was drafted in 2016, then the cycle of almost 3 years was in Rada as well and the committees, and it was adopted only in November 2019. But now we have the legal infrastructure ready for such big infrastructure projects.
Thank you. Okay. Before you finalize, I wanted to ask you if you could kindly add some personal flavor and just one short sentence that you're here and talking about the outlook for M&A. You still could be named as believers into M&A perspective, investment perspective of Ukraine as a country, as a combination of all the businesses, the states, and all the rest. What makes you believe that there is a good potential, good outlook? And now we heard a lot about the big steps that the state has done, that there are opportunities for investments and related to privatization, which are expected in the future. There are good investments from Ukrainian investors and the foreign investors, and both they made this leap of faith and they trusted that there's going to be a result out of it. It's not a charity, and like they're expecting some returns coming their way. But on top of it, you are all humans. What actually makes you believe? Whichever is ready, whoever is ready, just please raise your hand and start it. Just one small belief. Greg, please.
For me, it's very simple. The people of Ukraine. I've operated in several countries, a lot of countries in Central and Eastern Europe. The desire and the push forward that I feel in Ukraine is, despite all obstacles, for me personally, one of the big drivers to make me believe that it will fly. Eventually it will fly, but it will need time.
Well, personally, I do believe in Ukraine for several reasons. One of them is having your enemy, who believes also being German and working for Slavic, believes in Ukraine and believes in us. Because when we have a lot of guys like him, like his team, like shareholders, it means that we have a lot of capital which backs us up. And when we were talking about, let's say, Eastern Europe and Poland in particular, Peter hasn't mentioned, but I'm sure it kept in mind, that Poland received enormous amount of capital from European Union. And because of that, and structural reforms and etc., and being very wise in exploiting that capital and not giving any concerns to capital owners, they managed to develop their economy at such high pace, right? Yeah, we've made some mistakes in the past, unfortunately. And Olga has mentioned that for 20 years there was concession laws and etc. And only right now they're going forward because there is a political will, right? And there is a backup of international institutions going forward. That is why I would like to conclude that I believe in Ukraine because I'm Ukrainian, because I have such guys as Georg, who represent foreign capital, also believe in Ukraine. I see track record, real facts of investing in Ukraine. I showed that in our film. And I see that we have everything as Ukrainians needed for prosperity. It's just we need some, sustainability, some patience, guidance, leadership, certainly. I hope that for next 15 years we'll continue the trend which we have started and there won't be any changes. And I believe that the more foreign capital gets involved in Ukraine, the more backup, the more lobbying of proper structural reforms and not getting back to previous situation will take place. So we are increasing chances, and investment and development is about chances. There is no certainty, right? So chances are there, country is there, will is there. Good luck to us. Thank you.
From my perspective, and taking into account the directions that I'm in charge of, what I can say is that there is a strong political will to change the things. And that's not only the statements, that's a real, not decisions, that's a real law that was adopted last year. So there is a political will, and there are lots of investment opportunity from the state that the state will provide to the market. So I believe that these factors will attract here the investors, and I believe that Ukraine will be the most attractive country for investors for the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And I also would like to say that I not only believe in people, I also believe in the dialogue between the real investors, the companies, the business, and the state as well. And thank you for creating this platform, for exchanging the ideas, for exchanging the opinions, which is very valuable. And believe me, we hear the business, we hear the investors, and we talk. We are trying to talk, and we are trying to react as well. For example, 1 week ago, the Office of National Investment Council, we were organizing the closed meeting with the president and the representatives of 3 business associations. It was on Thursday last week, and there was a 2 hours meeting, and the president was. He was asked the questions, he was answering by himself, he was hearing the representatives of the business and the investors in Ukraine, and after that we are trying to change, we are trying to do our homework. So I really believe in dialogue, and in this kind of situation, this will help us. Definitely.
Olga, Taras, Andrei, Georg, thank you so much for coming, and hope to see you next year within this environment. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are moving forward. We have one more thing to do for the day, and there is a specific subject to cover. And for that, let me introduce a new component of our event today. It's an interview, and I wanted to invite Alexander Leberev, who's the Director of Corporate Finance and Treasury at NetInvest Group.
Доброго дня, шановні пані та панове. Ми все ж таки в Україні, тому почнемо з української мови, а потім переключимося англійською. Okay, let's switch into English, and thanks a lot for KPMG and the panelists. It was an extensive, of course sometimes Andrei was leading and sharing the speech, but nevertheless, a lot of things that were said are impressive, self-explanatory, and the information given, and especially what was given at the beginning of the KPMG presentation gives us a lot of information. Thank you for that.
I will explain to the audience the format and the content of what we are about to discuss now. Alexander, you've heard that now we've just discussed the M&A in Ukraine, the outlook, the figures in the past, but it's largely about equity investments. So before we start our conversation on debt financing, would you like to share your views in this regard? Is there any controversy in your opinion? How does that connect to equity in this respect?
Well, I think we can spend another couple of hours discussing all this stuff, especially in such countries like Ukraine. I'm pretty sure that equity, what comes from the very beginning, I think this is about education. This is about education of all us adults. This is about education of our children, because they are our future who would grow up in this country and would develop the business in this country. And this is about education in the sense of knowing the market. Because I think that literally most of the people here who are still the, let's say, experts in some of the fields do not know a lot about equity market as such. Why the United States are so successful? Not only because this is a powerful country with some theory created at some point of time called US dollar printing by Fed. It's like also a country where all the local people know how to invest money, especially, first of all, in the local market, into equity. This is what we lack in Ukraine. This is what we have to develop. And this is what will come in future, not tomorrow. Tomorrow it's not possible. First of all, we have to improve all the things. And I think that from the equity point of view, we should also look precise, because what Georg said, okay, they invested a couple of years ago, and we had a lot of negative things about local investors. We have a lot of negative things about some of the foreign investors who were also coming to the country for the short-term run. And in order to be, also precise, I mean, such names that were invested in Ukraine, international ones, they were not usually looking at the long-term strategy, with all due respect. Some of them did, but some of them just looked at the short-term return on the so-called Ukrainian developing country that could give them 3-digit benefit, double-digit benefit, I don't know, and that's it. Therefore, the strategic investors should be duly honored, should be given some benefits, should be duly treated. And I agree with Andrei, what he said about share. These are the Ukrainian investors who should be treated, first of all, as a priority by this country. So therefore, having said, in order to summarize the equity stuff, I think that we have to develop the market. First, we have to explain to people what is it, how it works, what are the rules, how to outflow the capital, because it's not only about investing, and let's be pragmatic. I mean, we are all working for earning money, earning profits, and the investors need to understand how to outflow the capital. Because I remember the time when in 2015 or 16, the National Bank of Ukraine, and it was the right approach there, but they controlled every and each $1 million. They were calling some of the exporters, asking, can you sell please another $5 million in the market? Because simply there were a lack of US dollars. At the same time, there were extremely hard limitations that we experienced, and probably they were positive. But what we see right now, sometimes, there is a significant relax or limitation toward the foreign currency control and outflow. But sometimes I ask myself, do we really need this? For whom we need this? Why do we need foreign currency control 1 year or more? What is probably the next issue? Or unregulated foreign currency control. Believe me, we as the biggest exporter of this country, we don't need the export foreign currency control for 1 year. Maybe half a year, maybe 9 months. In terms of equipment, like machinery, plants and so on, or purchasing of some specific details, probably we need even more than 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. But this is very specific. Other than that, this means that those people who are benefiting for outflow of this money from this country, they simply like earning on it, and that's it. So this is also part of the story.
Talking about the debts, it looks like it's also connected to M&A, because it's a wide accepted practice to actually use leverage and debt facilities to the deals. What is it like to borrow in Ukraine to the deal, or to borrow in Ukraine? What is it like?
Well, I think it's about the strategy of the company. It's like, like if you want to have continuity, if you want to set successful, continuing your, let's say, old times, current times, and the future times of developing the business, then you have to create the team. You should invest into people, because people are making this business. And most investors and the banks and all the IFIs, they rely on people. With all due respect, we can endlessly discuss what the government should do, what some other people should do. We should start with ourselves. We should start, first of all, appreciating the banks, the local banks. Guys, I know that the percentage of the NPLs is significantly huge, or was huge. And just yesterday, I'm not doing it a lot, like in the Facebook, but still, one of the TV channels showed the well-known agri company, and who is not complaining like the obvious things, like for example, Salitka. But this company is just telling some bullshit about, being 1% GDP of this country and being forced by Nabu and some other guys, that they are poor guys who actually withdrawing hundreds of millions, bankrupted several banks. So they are poor guys, like private bank, all this stuff. So they're just complaining that they have stolen some money from Ukraine and just telling, well, 20, 30,000 people, blah, blah, blah. So, we should start We should stop telling bullshit. We should appreciate the banks. We should remember that we have to return our loans. And if we attract the loan at 10%, we should then duly honor our obligation at 10%. If you know and you attract short-term 1.5% per month, let's say, or per day, apologize, loan from the online service, then you have to understand that you have to pay it. Otherwise around, you will not let the foreign investors, the banks, the IFIs invest in your country and give you money. And then another part of the story that I said is probably the team. I think for the small companies and medium-sized companies, it's extremely difficult to have a proper managing of this process. And therefore, they need some either outsource or supportive partners like KPMG and so on, or create the teams themselves. I think that, well, once again, Andrei is here, he's the right, let's say, approach here and example how difficult it is for the local Ukrainian investor having not billions of dollars to attract relatively adequate financing to invest into Ukrainian economy. So it's simply impossible because like the government banks would not give you money because you will still spend like a couple of years to receive this loan. So you need the security, you need everything, blah, blah, blah. So it's nearly impossible. So therefore for this we need some clear and straightforward procedures and we need of course people. Once again, people sometimes, but then the foreign investors come. It's also important to say that, you know, that they cannot do business here without people. They can bring some of the experts, 1, 2, 3, 4, but they should invest into the education and professional development of the teams here, because otherwise it's not possible to do it. And then, of course, once again, it's all about us. It's not about government or about someone else. It's about us. Say thanks to the drivers, thanks to all the people that are around you, saying, paying, let's say, fulfilling all the rules while you are driving the car. So everything starts from these simple things. And then you are coming, like bank, let's say financial literal, to return the loans, to service the debt, to invest into equity, and then, you know, like it's a strategy. If you want to be in the long-term run, then of course you should keep on doing this. And then it is difficult time. You should not say, goodbye my retail bank, I will not pay you this $500 million or 1 million just because it's a difficult time. When it is a difficult time, come to your bank and try to explain, try to discuss. Of course, it's also on the side of our banks, because some of our banks are difficult in this sense, but I think first of all, international banks, some of the big private banks of Ukraine, and even some state-owned banks, they have this experience, and they have developed this stuff. So this is about education, I think, and the strategy.
So you just started describing the borrowing and lending culture in Ukraine. What about the players? Lending money is a business, and the business might be done differently by local banks and foreign banks. What type of examples do you have to kind of differentiate, compare and contrast those cultures?
Well, I think sometimes local banks are like, I don't know, a magic circle stuff, you know, like they can give you money very fast. Probably they need some additional stuff, some side business, security, and so on, but they can do it very fast, but it would be expensive. At the same time, the local banks are much more adequate in some of the things, but at the same time they can be rival. That's to be very pragmatic. Like all the banks in this country belong to someone, but for the state-owned banks, and sometimes they're even more complicated because they belong to the government. But I think that the local banks are extremely limited with their, on the side of the deposits. They don't have long-term liquidity. So simply this limits them from giving long-term liquidity to their clients. This means that at the end they need some support from NBU and the government. And I know that these people are discussing it right now, how to hedge this stuff, how to provide long-term liquidity. Because otherwise, you know, like by giving, you know, like, okay, we are all in one country. No one knew what happened in 2014. And this is, unfortunately, influenced many people. At the same time, I hear, okay, there is a devaluation of hryvnia, or there is a revaluation of hryvnia. Guys, come on. Like, we lost this year because of revaluation of hryvnia more than $100 million, maybe up to 200. So what? I mean, you should create your business and manage it in the way so that try to foresee all this stuff. Do hedging, do NDF, whatever. So therefore, the locals are more flexible, but more challenging. And of course, they are more confident, they are more, not confident, but let's say they are ready to close some eyes on some tricky stuff, gray area, I would say. When you do business with internationals, you cannot do such a way. You should be transparent, let's say straightforward. There is always a headroom for explaining your problems or challenges. But at the same time, it's also a matter of long-term investments. Internationals will not give you the money tomorrow. But if you do business with them for some period of time, they will believe in you and will stay with you for many years. This is important, I think.
You mentioned a number of obstacles for M&A activity in Ukraine, and there are obstacles for borrowing money in Ukraine, even for lending money in Ukraine. If you were to present a kind of a ranking of debt market issues, what would be your top 3 obstacles that you would mention?
For the borrower, for the company, or for the lenders?
For the market, for the debt markets in particular, so that it could develop.
Well, I think we all understand that where we're going to is local currency. I think we need the liquidity in local currency, otherwise we will not resolve the situation. We need to understand and we need to increase the approach and access of the people in terms of infrastructure to these instruments. Because why we are weak in terms of the local currency and the local liquidity? Because the number of banks is limited. People are not ready to place their long-term deposits with the banks. So we should improve their literacy in terms of financial aspects. They should understand how to invest money. For example, in corporate bond sector, this was the case in 2007, and it was successful, where some of the issuers locally has already started to issue 3-5-year bonds in local currency with an interest rate 10 to 12. So this is already a benefit. So I think that this is long-term liquidity, and I think regulations. We need regulations. It's clear that NBU and some other things, but we need to move further. We still don't have in Ukraine pre-export financing. We still don't have project financing. We still have a lot of things in terms of some specific issues like agriculture business. I guess there are loads of them. And I think that these issues with the land, with the stocks and so on, I think that one of the things, who is booming right now? Number one is not the banks. It's, for example, ATP leasing. They're doing number one, simply because the leasing allow themselves to control the assets that they transfer for temporary usage or permanent usage to the customer. So therefore, let's say we already developed some solutions, but we need more. We need also some access of some of the exporters to long-term financing, like the equipment financing, ECA financing. Just recently, Ukraine has been improved for OECD rating from 7th to 6th group level, but you know, like it's still like the level below Egypt. With all due respect, I think my country is much better than Egypt. With all due respect to Egypt, involved in many aspects, including inter alia, that yes, we still have war in the east, but still this country has the war always. And you know, like, so I'm saying that the government is paying a lot of attention to it. We need to improve it together. I think they need to do more. I think that the rating of Ukraine, you know, like it's a little bit stupid that Metinvest has double B minus and the sovereign has lower level. Well, it's not right. I mean, it's good for Metinvest probably, but still not good enough, because we would prefer to have our country to be triple B or triple B minus, where the Metinvest will be double B plus. I'm fine with it. It would be much better for us, for all of us. So I think that we need to dedicate ourselves more and more, and we see just recent the auction that was done by the Ministry of Finance regarding the local bonds and so on, and it was not very successful. It means that already we see that investors were actually looking a lot towards the appetite of receiving double-digit return. I'm not saying that it is very straightforward, no. But thanks God, the government right now can control it and cannot apply for higher amounts and by providing higher rates. This is good also. This is sometimes to step back. But we need to understand how to do it, you know, like not one step at a time. It's already too late. You know, like what Andrei said, like we need Poland to kick, but we need to move faster to Poland. Not just, you know, like to do one step. It's too late.
We are talking about the outlook for the upcoming years and probably doing some bets in terms of sectors, in terms of the actions, etc. There might be some room for optimism, given that you're here. What would be your bet in this respect? What type of changes you are envisaging right now? What is that you expect that would help the debt markets and actually make it work? What's your reason for optimism?
Well, I think that the foreign investors are coming to this country. I think some of those who stepped in a couple of years ago should stay and should continue developing business. Some of the investors who are developing the local market, like the Ukrainian investors, should also be appreciated, like Share or some the biopharma or whatever, any other business, agricultural businesses, the DP world that has come to us, it's okay, but it's also a a question to the strategy, what are they going to do or planning to do in this country? Are they planning to invest more, or they just will keep it at the level of, you know, like 7th year of the school, or they would to improve it to the 11th year of the school, or like a university. It's also not to keep us as a like agricultural country with a land. I mean, it's easier to sell this land for, I don't know, $500, but for $1,000. I mean, like, that per hectare, but it's like, it's not the sense of it. We should create the value of this land, that people from Ukraine should benefit from it, and Ukraine as a country should benefit from it. And therefore, having said that, I think that in order to attract that, in order to do investments, in order to do improvements in infrastructure, I think once again we should invest into people, we should have transparent rules, and we should understand that by changing the prime minister or even the president should not change the whole direction of the country. And therefore to say something was bad, okay, it's nice, but it doesn't help investors. They would prefer to say, okay, it is right now better, a little bit than it was, it's already enough. So therefore, you know, like, it's not to blame the previous governments and the presidents, whatever they are, it's just to say what we did better, and to what extent also to praise what were the things in the previous times that were also not bad. And maybe to look at them, and maybe to transform them. So I think that it's like legacy, I would say.
And as a politician, adding some personal touch, what would be one thing or a couple of things that make you believe in the success, ultimate success of the business, of yourself as a professional, and the country as a long-term story of good and bad times, but eventually successful?
Well, I think that this country is a great country with potential. We have an IT sector, we have a lot of other things, machinery as well, but I think that should be a semi-product, I would say. It should be like, and the government should support it to some extent as well. So it should be like, you know, like straightforward development of these sectors, and we should understand that we should care about future right now, not tomorrow, not to promise, but to do today. And believe me, I mean, we should dedicate ourselves, and we should start with ourselves once again. This is the biggest problem of this country. We like to discuss all the problems, all the constraints, and so on, but we forget about ourselves. Paying taxes, paying fines if necessary, paying, I don't know, anything what is required by the government. Of course, it's all about money in this world, with all due respect. It's clear, but we should somehow differentiate, let's say, what we do, when we do, and at what stage we do. And of course, it's also about the government to try to minimize these negative impacts to the extent possible, of course. It's not like they don't have a crystal ball as well, but still they have, because otherwise, what's the sense of having this government or the president? So they should dedicate probably more and more themselves towards the business and their strategy, not short-term goals. This is probably the biggest challenge that we have for this year.
Yeah, that was the song. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. So we're starting with the man in the mirror. I want to thank you, Alexander, and specifically I appreciate that given that you have birthday today, you've still joined us, and my sincere congratulations with your birthday. All the best to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this event. I appreciate that you came, and given that I'm standing in front of you and between you and your upcoming lunch and coffee break, I'm not staying anymore. So thank you so much. Thank you for coming, and hope to see you soon next year for the same event. Thank you, and have a good rest of the day.